right, guys, let's turn to the book of Romans. We're going to be in Romans chapter 4. And we've been going through the book of Romans. We've seen, that the book of Romans is kind of this one big central idea where Paul's writing to the church of Rome, and they're having some issues and problems that all the early churches were having of this issue of that it was very blended, it's very mixed. All of a sudden they had a church with barbarians, a church with Greeks, a church with Jews that were all kind of mishmashed together. So they would have had a different upbringing, they would have had different cultures, they would have had different past religious experiences. And now all of a sudden they're all thrust into this one new thing of Christianity. And they're drawing upon different pasts. But the problem is the barbarian, it seemed like the barbarian had a real easy time turning loose to barbarism. And because we don't have any letters where he's like, hey, quit robbing, stealing, and murdering. And then at the same time, the Greeks, there was some pride and a little bit of puffery there because they were kind of the peak of civilization and the peak of thought and all of this. And even the Romans were like, oh, the Greeks. And so there was a sense of pride, but really what was happening was the Jews. The Jews were a big problem in the New Testament church. And the reason is because here, these two other outside groups were discovering God for the first time. The Jews had him for a very long time. They were just really bad at it. They were just really bad at serving him. And so Paul, wherever you see the churches spring up and you see these Messianic Jews, these believing Jews, they always wanted to kind of Jew up the Christians. And so they're like, yeah, a good thing that you're not a barbarian anymore, but now you need to become a good Jew in order to become a good Christian. A good thing that you're not one of those pagan, polytheistic Greeks anymore. You're a monotheistic Christian Jew. You need to become more Jewish to become more Christian. And guys, honestly, like that is still a problem in the church today. This is a problem in the first century church. It's a problem in the church 2,000 years later, to where, you turn on, TBN or any of those. Please don't turn them on, but I'm just saying if you do, then what you're going to have is eventually, if you watch for more than about 15 minutes, somebody's going to come on and they're going to start trying to talk Jewish stuff. And they're going to be like, oh, Purim, or, this obscure Jewish thing, and they really want to incorporate that into Christianity and make it an additional thing, whether it be head coverings, or whether it be the ceremonial washings, or the feast days, or the various different things. That there's this inclination towards wanting to go into Judaism and pluck things out and then make it part of Christianity. And so we still have this influence that's going on through various different ones. If a Jewish guy becomes a Christian, then like his income is set for the rest of his life, because he can go to every semi-Pentecostal Word of Faith church, say anything that has anything to do with Judaism, and instantly they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so what happens is they kind of become really good at these things that aren't Christianity versus stressing on the things that are Christianity. So Paul is addressing this to the church at Rome, and he's systematically, like, basically the first 5-6 chapters is just like one big diss track is all it is. It's just him pretty much telling them, you're not that special. You had a head start, like God picked you not because you were the biggest, strongest, smartest, but because you were the least. You had him for thousands of years before these others, and y'all messed it up. Like that's the whole Old Testament, is God reveals himself to people and they disobey him and serve pagan gods instead. And he has to pull them back and draw them back in. So he's trying to tell them, maybe you shouldn't think you're so special, and maybe you shouldn't have such a high opinion of yourself. Maybe Judaism isn't the high watermark of culture and civilization that you think it is. Maybe you Jews need to become better Christians and less Jewish. Guys, let's put our color crayons up, please. And so as he's going into this, he first attacks the law itself, and he starts to break it down. And now in his breakdown of the law, he's going to shift and he's going to go to Abraham. And he's really going to address the idea of Abraham, because Abraham's a big point of pride. They're like, Abraham is our father. Well, guess what? Abraham's our father too. So that's the point that he's fixing to make in Romans chapter 4. Verse 1, he says, "What then shall we say that Abraham, our father, has found according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now to him who works, the wages are not counted as grace, but as debt. But to him who does not work, but believes on him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is accounted for righteousness. Just as David also describes the blessedness of the man to whom God imputes righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven, and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord shall not impute sin." So, he starts to address this topic of Abraham. As he's approaching the topic of Abraham, he wants to make the point really hard and really fast that Abraham had righteousness imputed upon him because of faith, not because of works. Now, he especially did not have righteousness accounted to him because of works, because what would define works? We'd have to have a definition of works, right? If there were righteous works, unrighteous works, there would have to be a defining or a difference making between those two. And who would make that difference? God would. God would be the determiner. So, what determining factor, what rule of thumb, what set of mores would God use to determine what was righteous and what was unrighteous? Yeah, but did he have it? Did Abraham have the Ten Commandments? He didn't have them. So here, Abraham is imputed righteousness apart from the law because there was no law. He couldn't have kept the Ten Commandments. God ain't gave them yet. So there hasn't been the mountain on fire and it's filled with smoke and lightning and the earthquake and the booming voice of God upon the men where they all hear the Ten Commandments together collectively. That ain't happened yet. Abraham is far, 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 far before that. And you say, okay, hold on, Jonathan. Abraham probably had a really good lineage. Like he probably just had good blood, right? Well, where did Abraham come out of? When he was called out of a land, where was he called out of? Ur. That's right, he was a pirate. Ur. All right, so here, pirate Abraham had many sons. And so here he calls him out of the land of Ur. Now, what was the land of Ur? What people group, what region were the Urs? Chaldeans. Yeah, he was a Chaldean. Now, Sundays, what book are we going through? Daniel. All right. And Daniel, he's having to deal with this king named Nebuchadnezzar. Nebo being the god that he worshipped, and then Chadnezzar is his name, okay? And so it's Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar, or Nebuchadnezzar, guess what he is? He's a Chaldean. You say, but hold on, they're in Babylon. No. He's a Chaldean. The Chaldeans conquered Babel. So they come into Babylon and they conquer Babel while it's still all messed up. He's a Chaldean. Now, what's the difference between Abraham and Nebuchadnezzar? Bloodline, there's nothing different. They're both Chaldeans. Do you know who the Chaldeans trace their ancestry back to? Yeah, we don't know. Okay, here it is. It's Arphaxad, the famed biblical Arphaxad. Y'all know who he is? He's the first son of Shem. Shem, Ham, Japheth. All right, the three sons of Noah. So, Arphaxad, he is the first son of Shem. That's where we get the word Semitic, is from Shem. Okay? So, the very first son, Arphaxad, is the Chaldean granddaddy. Now, this is what's so cool. All right, what's so cool is when you really trace out the lineages and you take a look at it. Abraham is like 8, 9 down from Arphaxad. So like he's like 8, 9 generations down from Arphaxad. But guess what? He was born 2 years after Noah died. Abraham was born 2 years after Noah died. Noah's son Shem would have lived for 150 years with Abraham. Abraham would have been somewhere between 50 and 100 years old when God came and knocked on his door and said, I want you to leave your people. What people is he leaving? He's leaving the previous 8, 9 generations, including Shem. So, all right, Shem could have told him about the giants. He could have told him about the flood. He could have told him first person, not hand me down, hand me down, hand me down. We're talking first-hand account. Me and Dad built a boat. Me and Dad had to escape the giants. Me and Dad had to feed the animals on the ark. Me and Dad had to shovel the excrement over the side because that's a year worth of animal stuff. All right? He could have said, when the boat came to a rest, me and Dad, like he's got 50 to 100 years of first-person, first-hand accounting of history, of the life of Noah. He would have had first-hand account of what the world was like before the flood and what life was like after the flood. So Abraham had some advantages, right? Like Abraham would have had 50 to 100 years of being with Shem, of hearing the first-hand accounting of all of this stuff. That is pretty exceptional and pretty awesome, is it not? Now, who did God tell him, I want you to leave the land of your people? He was having to leave Shem. He was having to leave those guys. Those were the Urs that he was having to leave. Ooh, okay. So, at this point, is Abraham a Jew? There ain't no Jews. There are no Jews. So, there's no law. There's no Jews. What else would make somebody a Jew? Well, he's not living. No circumcision. Uh-oh. No temple, no sacrifice, no, none of that. So let me ask you, who does Abraham have more in common with at this point? Prior, when God chooses him, and when God says, this is, I want you to leave your people, all right, 14 years before he ever gives him circumcision, when God chooses Abraham, who does Abraham have more in common with? That old barbarian, that old Greek, or a Moses-infused Jew? A Mosaic Jew. Who does he have most in common with? The barbarian, doesn't he? Because he doesn't have the fine fancy culture. He doesn't have the pillars and the columns and the thought and all of that. He definitely doesn't have a law. He doesn't have circumcision. He ain't growing his hair and his sideburns out. He ain't got tassels, and he ain't shimmying a mile away from home on the Sabbath day. He has none of that. Who is he most like? The barbarian. Now, Here, the old prideful, we good, we Jews. Who do they want to be most like? The Greeks. That's why he introduces these three characters, but then he starts to associate the Jews and the Greeks together. And he starts to fuse those two and saying, aren't you good like those Greeks? Aren't you good like those Greeks? Aren't you good like those Greeks? And they're going, yeah, I'm a good Greek. And now what did he just do? He just said, Abraham, who's a hero of the good Jews, is most like the barbarian, the guy that you really look down upon. That's who he's most like. So we have all of this that's playing into it. We have Abraham. Abraham would have had this time with Shem. Shem would have still been alive at the time of Ishmael and Isaac. He would have seen both of those guys born. I mean, like, it's important for that chronology so that we don't divorce this and act like he's out there in left field discovering God for the first time. He literally had Shem, who had literally got off the boat with Noah, having heard from God, seen from God, and being led by God. Okay? So he says, verse 9, does this blessedness then come upon the circumcised only, or upon the uncircumcised also? For we say that faith was accounted to Abraham for righteousness. How then was it accounted? While he was circumcised or uncircumcised? Not while circumcised, but while uncircumcised. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of righteousness of the faith, which he had while still uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all those who believe, though they are uncircumcised, that righteousness might be imputed to them, and the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but also walk in the steps of faith which our father Abraham had while still uncircumcised. So he's saying the circumcision is a sign and a seal of something that was possessed before he was ever circumcised. So did God's choosing of Abraham have anything to do with circumcision? No. Circumcision had everything to do with God's choosing Abraham. So it was the opposite. Are we saved by getting baptized? Is baptism a sign and a seal of what has taken place before we're ever baptized? Yeah, you're saved before you're ever baptized. That's it. Baptism doesn't save you, okay? It is a sign, it's a seal, it's a mark, it's a testimony of what has already happened. It's an outward sign of an inward condition. The same as circumcision was. So circumcision was something that they carried in their body. It was a reminder. It was a something, but there was no righteousness in circumcision. There was no, oh, okay, well, you're circumcised, so you must be one of God's people. Would it be possible for a person who is not affiliated with God whatsoever, let's just say somebody that just outrageously hates God, could they make a conscious effort to become circumcised? Yeah, in the flesh. They would never. That wouldn't be a circumcision of the heart. So would it matter? It wouldn't matter at all. It wouldn't matter at all, would it? Now, this is a very, something to really think about here is with the circumcision. Why would God choose that? You ever just stopped and thought about that? Why would God choose that? Because it's a little strange, right? Like if I was like, you know what, anybody that wants to join Northern Heights, you have to get a tattoo. All right, y'all, how many of y'all are still rocking with me? All right. And you're like, okay, a few of you, all right, that's fine. And you go, well, where? And I go, well, I think you know. And you go, what? Yeah. You go, seriously? Yeah. Like, how many are still getting in line? Nah, man, like it is something that it is very personable, right? It's very personal. Do yeah, like it is very personal. It is definitely a sign. It's definitely a reminder. It is something that you have to be pretty dedicated to get it right. Like that's not there's not going to be a lot of people who's just like, yep, us, bingo, I'll do it. No, like that's going to take some decision making. There's going to have to be some thought about this of, how much do I trust him and how steady of a hand does he have? Like there's going to be a lot of circumstantial data that we pull in there to that decision making process. So when God reveals this to Abraham, who is already declared righteous, already, and he goes, this is a sign and a seal of what I've promised to you. And he goes, okay, what do you want me to do? He goes, all those dudes. Yep. Your son, yep. Is, this is what I want you to do. And he tells him the details of circumcision. I think that would take a Gideon moment, right? We'd be like, maybe I need to put the lamb skin out and see if it's dry and the ground is wet. And then the next morning be like, maybe we need to see if it's wet and the ground is dry. I need to double stamp. I need to triple stamp my double stamp, there, like we're going to make sure, double check everything to make sure. Okay. So here he gives them this sign, and it's that it's very personal. It must be very sincere. And then also, it's a reminder 24/7. It's a mark that you're going to see. And then also, it's going to be something that when acts are taking place for the procurement of future generations, is everybody still rocking with me? Okay. Then the sign and the seal of the covenant is very much present. That it's not just about you, big boy, but rather that it's going to carry forward in the future generations. All right, so even in that very intimate moment, it's still very present. Okay. So, the mark in and of itself is not the salvation. Getting the cut doesn't mean that you're part of the covenant. It's just a sign. It's just a seal. That's it. So, you could bear the mark and not be part of the covenant. You could be in the covenant and not bear the mark. So can you be a Christian and not be baptized? Yeah, absolutely you can. Okay, now, if you're a Christian, should you be baptized? Yeah, absolutely. So those two can be true at the same time. Okay. Now, if you're a Christian, is it sinful to be circumcised? No. Well, why not? Isn't circumcision a sign of the law? It was before the law. That's right. It was before the law, right? It came before the law. It has nothing to do with the law. Nothing to do with it. Now, within the law, it details some hows and whens, but it doesn't say that you have to, right? It's explaining something that happens before. And so in that, okay, so it's not sinful to be. Must a Christian be circumcised? No, in fact, doesn't matter at all. Doesn't really matter at all. Okay? So in that, the choice, and this is something, and it's coming up now because people who hate God's always going to find a way to hate God. And it's starting to be put on the same plane as in Islam. The circumcision is the other way, the ladies, not the men. It's very graphic and it's very awful and it's very much torturous and painful. With the guys, it very much is not. Okay. And so they're trying to equate the two, and they're calling it genital mutilation. And it's not, which is funny because they're literally castrating little boys and telling them they're girls, and that is okay. But a sign and a seal of a covenant, a little cutting in the flesh that doesn't really alter anything, they want to say that that's bad. It's kind of mixed up, isn't it? And so that's just how sick and perverted the world is. That's how far the God haters are willing to go. Is that castration good, but circumcision bad, and then trying to equate something that is only really cosmetic in nature with something that's truly traumatic and life impacting forever. So the Muslim practice of female circumcision is awful. The Abrahamic tradition of male circumcision is basically cosmetic in nature. Doesn't impact anything. And so they want to conflate the two because they hate God. They want to destroy the sign in the flesh. So it says, let's see where we left off. Sign and seal. All right. Yep, verse 13. He says, for the promise that he would be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, faith's made void. I mean, if you can just work it and make it work and earn it by works, what's the purpose of faith? So he says, is made void the promise of no effect, verse 15, because the law brings about wrath, for where there is no law, there's no transgression. Okay, so let's talk about that. The law reveals wrath. The law brings wrath. Because where there is no law, there is no transgression. All right, so that makes the law sound really bad, right? It's like, why did God give us this law? If God would have gave us no law, then we could have just done whatever we wanted to. We wouldn't know what bad is. Have y'all ever got into that with your kids or something? You ever had, like, how many of y'all had to make a rule that you don't eat the soap to keep the kids from eating soap? Yeah, like, like you didn't sit down with the kid, as soon as they were intelligible and could grasp the information and be like, let me detail all the things that are right and wrong in this house. Did you? Anybody do that? Any of you have to tell your kids, listen, I know that you just turned 1 month old. Don't eat dog food. Did any of you do that? No? But guess what? Kids get into dog food and cat food sometimes, right? They sure do. Now, once they do that, did you have to be like, listen, dog food, off limits. You go into that, we're going biblical chastisement model over the dog food. Okay? Like, how many of you had to do that? Nothing, okay? So in the same way, the law is not this super comprehensive, overarching, have no fun set of repressions that are put upon man so that we can have no fun. And we just have to sit around and pray and think good thoughts all the time because anything else is a sin. But rather, what really is the law? The law is just God going, this is what I think about this stuff. Here are the really bad things. Stay away from the bad things. All right. So, like, don't eat poison. Eating dog food is dumb, but it's not poison. Okay? So the law deals very much with the poisons and deals very much with remember the righteous. Remember the good stuff. So it's all about don't go over there. Keep your eyes over here. Like, that's the whole point of the law. But somehow we've gotten it twisted in Christianity that law bad. And law is all about have no fun and can't do anything. It's always a sin. It's like when I was working at the Christian camp I used to work at. There was this kid, man. He just looked all sad all the time. And I got him one day and I was like, man, why are you always like on the verge of tears? He was like, man, every time we start to have fun, that bell rings and I got to go to church. And, because you go to church like 3-4 times a day. He was like, the bell rings, I got to go to church. And so, like that's the view so much of people when they look at the law of God, isn't that it's to direct us to look at the righteousness and to stay away from the evil. And instead they go, I can't do anything fun. I got to be over here with all this dumb stuff all the time. Well, what's the problem in the equation? The problem is the heart. The problem is that the heart is attracted to all the evil and to all the poison that God says no. God never declared a blessing a bad thing. He never told us that something's a sin that was good for us. All right? There's no sin in exercising. There's no sin in eating clean. There's no sin in getting married. There's no sin in the pleasures of the flesh and things like that. There's no sin in that. But in each one of those things, there's an area where you can veer into the curse. If we start to make exercise the whole point of life, I live to run. I got a runner's body. Y'all can tell, right? Yeah. That's right. Have the facade of strength. And so, but in that, like, there's nothing wrong with being fit. But comes a point where it can become idolatry, right? Yeah. Is there anything wrong with drinking water? No? Do you know how much water you have to drink to die? That you can actually get water toxicity. You can drink too much water and drown within yourself. They had a radio contest some years back, and the woman, I think, had to drink 2 gallons of water on air within like 1 hour to win like a PlayStation or something for her kid for Christmas. And she drank the 2 gallons and died from drinking water. So even water, too much in the wrong avenue, used the wrong way, can be destructive, can't it? Yeah. That's why I only drink Monster energy drinks. Water will kill you. Nothing in the Bible about monsters. And so it's just a scam put out there by Big Water. That's all it is. It's just a conspiracy. And so but in that, here the law is a good thing if one uses it righteously. Now, if we pave a new road and they don't put up any speed limit signs, what's the speed limit on the road? As fast as you can go, right? There actually is laws that say if nothing's posted, it's this, 35 on the dirt road, 45 or so if it's not parked. Yeah. But let's pretend we're in Germany. Okay, yeah. Then yeah, it's just how fast can you go? All right, how fast do you feel is safe? All right. Now, why are the speed limits put there? Why did we come up with speed limits? So that you wouldn't be a danger to yourself and that you wouldn't be a danger to others. Because sometimes car go faster than brain go. Okay? And so with that, at 25, everybody can handle the car. All right? At 100, very few people can handle the car. Okay, and so I don't even want to know what that smirk was about, but at 100 it gets real dangerous. All right, because just a little, you can go a long way with just a little this, a little amount of time, and just a little shift. You can go a long way and do a lot of damage. All right, so with that, that's the reason they came up with the speed limit. It wasn't because they didn't want you to get there. They didn't want you to get to Birmingham 6 minutes faster. Because that's what it would be. Like if you really do the math and you look at it, like I used to love, growing up in the Wing Audubon down there with, Wing National Expressway, where all the Yankees would come through Wing and they'd fly through 137 and through the National Forest and they'd come up to the Y and like just run through the stop sign and like they'd just blow past you, man. I mean, like you're creeping along, like 60, 65, like a good center, and they just right around you. And then the first red light in Andalusia, guess who you're beside? That goober that blew past you 10 miles ago, because he got like an extra 45-second head start of you. That's all it was. It didn't amount to anything. Like you pull up to the gas pump, that idiot's pumping gas at the next pump. Yeah, like he's just like, 1 minute, 2 minutes ahead of you. And the same, like unless you're driving a huge distance, the arrival time between driving 85, 90 on the interstate or driving the 70 on the interstate is minuscule. Minuscule. You're talking like from here to Pigeon Forge, you're going to get there like 12 minutes sooner. Is it worth the danger? Is it worth the danger that you're putting everybody else at risk? No, it's not. It's not. And so that's the reason why it's put there. Isn't because they want to slow you down. It's a conspiracy with the car companies or any. No, it's like, hey, we don't want you to be a danger to you. We don't want you to be a danger to everybody else on the road. So just chill. This is a safe speed that everybody kind of agrees. This is the fastest safe speed that you can go. In the same, the law isn't given to keep us from having fun. It's to direct us towards the righteousness, towards the good things, towards the blessing, towards all that God wants us to have. It was there as a gift to us. It was given in a response to the people going, God, how do we please you? And he said, oh, well, let me tell you. I've been waiting for somebody to ask. And he starts to list off the ways. And all the ways are for us to be healthy and for us to be prosperous and for us to be less sinful and less wicked and less, for there to be less crime and less injury and less heartache. And that's all that's wrapped up in the law. So, if there's no speed limit, there's no speeding tickets. But that's also a contrary way of kind of looking at the law. He says, let's see. Therefore, verse 16, therefore it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham. So he's saying it's for the Mosaic Jew and for the Abraham barbarians out there, who is the father of us all. Oh man. He's the father of the barbarian. He's the father of the Greek. He's the father of the Jew. It all runs back into Abraham. As it's written, I've made you a father of many nations. Not just one, many nations. In the presence of him who he believed, God, who gives life from the dead, calls those things which do not exist as though they did. Who, contrary to hope, in hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations, according to what was spoken. So shall your descendants be. And not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, since he was about 100 years old. Shem still alive, right there. Shem was alive until Abraham was about 150 years old. So when he gave him the promise of an heir, Shem's still alive. And the deadness of Sarah's womb, he did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God and being fully convinced that what he had promised, he was able to perform. And therefore, it was accounted to him for righteousness. So he not only believed that God existed, but he also believed what God said, and he believed that God was able to do what God said he was able to do. That's pretty easy, right? How many of us believe that God exists? It's everybody, okay? How many of you believe that God can do what God says he can do? Oh, absolutely, because God doesn't lie, does he? He's incapable of lying. He's the purveyor of all truth. So if he says it, it's true. If we disagree with it, we're wrong. We're wrong. So what about when he says like things we don't like? Ooh, what if he says things that accord to like big no-nos in today's society? Ooh. Well, he's still right, isn't he? So all them Old Testament laws that he gives about slavery, is slavery wrong? Oh, man. I see it. Oh, that's the right answer. Which one? Because what we know in what is popularized in American history is called chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is wrong according to God. You can't go kidnap somebody. In fact, if you do, that's the death penalty. Kidnappers, death penalty. So right there, you can't kidnap somebody, and you can't force them to be your slave. Ooh. So that kind of does away with that, right? We can say, yep, that's evil. God says that's evil. But what about if we take a dude and we lock him in a box for 50 years because of something he did when he was 18 years old? Is that right? Well, God never said that that was right. So our modern American prison system is wrong. God, how long of a prison sentence did God say is the max? 7 years, 6, 7 years. That's right. That's it. So locking somebody away for more than 6 or 7 years is what? Wrong. Wrong. Now, God says that there's 27 sins that are worthy of the death penalty. So how many crimes are worthy of the death penalty? 27. 27. Now in America we use one. Idaho just passed a second one. Now in Idaho, if you're proven to be a child molester, death penalty. I think it's great. I think it's great. We just need to copy and paste that. And in fact, I think Montgomery would do a great job just looking at Idaho and Florida and Louisiana and just copying and pasting the stuff that they're putting out right now. It's phenomenal. And so that, in fact, that may be, if I ever run for something for political office, that may be my slogan: copy and paste Florida. That's it. So but in that, here in America, what we've done is just one. Supreme Court 1970 outlawed the death penalty for cases of rape. That's dumb, right? Yeah. If you still had it, guess what there'd be a lot less of? Rape. Yep. And so you'd be a lot more careful if you knew that you're not going to get 5 or 10, you're going to die. It's a whole different dynamic, isn't it? It's almost like God's smarter than we are. And so he had it figured out. So he says what he promised he's able to perform, and therefore it was accounted to him for righteousness. So what is righteousness? Believing that there's God, believing what God says, believing that God can do what God says. It says, now it was not written for his sake alone that it was imputed to him, but also for us. It shall be imputed to us who believe in him who raised up Jesus our Lord from the dead, who was delivered up because of our offenses and was raised up for our justification, for our forgiveness, for the wiping away of our sin debt. That's what Jesus did. Okay? All right, guys, any questions? No? All right. 6:59. I'm doing pretty good.